People think New Year's Eve is about endings, about letting go, about champagne and countdowns and pretending the past 12 months didn't leave marks. For me, it was about being erased quietly. The office was half empty that afternoon. Desks cleared early. Out-of-office replies already active. People drifting toward plans that didn't include thinking about work ever again. The city outside was already preparing to celebrate. Inside, everything felt suspended. I remember the clock on my screen. 4:47 p.m. 17 minutes before most people mentally check out for the year. That's when my manager called me into the conference room. No warning. No context. Just a message that said, "Quick chat before you head out." He didn't look angry. That's what stays with me. No raised voice. No tension. Just the calm confidence of someone who believed the decision had already been justified. "We're going in a different direction," he said. The words people use when they don't want to explain anything. He thanked me for my contribution, for my dedication, for my time. Then he slid the document across the table. Termination. Effective immediately. New Year's Eve. I remember nodding. Not because I agreed, but because I understood something he didn't. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't ask for reconsideration. I signed. When I walked back to my desk, the office felt different. Not hostile. Just unaware. People were laughing. Packing up. Talking about midnight plans and resolutions. No one noticed that a system had just been removed. Not a person. A system. I shut down my computer, collected my bag, and walked out into the evening while fireworks vendors were setting up on the sidewalks. By the time midnight came, everyone was celebrating a new beginning. By morning, the company was discovering what they had just lost. But that part of the story didn't start with chaos. It started with silence. And silence in corporate spaces is never accidental. The thing about silence is that it travels faster than panic. While fireworks cracked open the sky and people toasted to fresh starts, nothing moved inside the company. No alerts. No emergency messages. No frantic calls. That's how I knew it hadn't hit yet. Systems don't fail dramatically at first. They hesitate. I woke up late on New Year's Day. Not because I was celebrating. Because for the first time in years, no one needed me at dawn. My phone was still. Too still. Normally, even on holidays, something buzzed. A monitoring ping. A nervous message from someone who didn't understand why a process stalled. That morning, there was nothing. I made coffee. Sat by the window. Watched the city recover from celebration. And I thought about the meeting again. The way he'd said different direction like it was neutral. Like it wasn't a choice with weight. They didn't fire me because I failed. That's important. They fired me because I made things look boring. When systems run quietly, leadership forgets what keeps them alive. Stability feels accidental. Reliability feels replaceable. By late morning, the silence broke. Not with a call. With a notification. A calendar invite forwarded by a former teammate. Subject line, emergency sync, infrastructure. I wasn't invited. I didn't need to be. I could already picture the room. People logging in from vacation rentals. Executives wearing casual sweaters and forced calm. Someone saying, "It's probably nothing," while checking the same dashboard over and over. The first thing that failed wasn't production. It was confidence. A dependency didn't refresh. A vendor handshake stalled. A service that relied on an undocumented exception stopped behaving politely. Nothing catastrophic. Yet, just enough friction to slow everything at once. The problem with modern systems is that they're built on assumptions. Assumptions about who knows what. About who fixes what when something behaves strangely. Most of those assumptions had my name attached to them. Quietly. I wasn't the owner on paper. I wasn't the escalation contact in the org chart. I was the person people messaged after the playbook failed. Around noon, my phone rang. I didn't answer. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. I had been terminated. Effective immediately. Which meant the system was now behaving exactly as designed. By early afternoon, Slack channels were filling with questions. Not answers. Does anyone know why the service isn't retrying? Wasn't there a workaround for this? I swear this used to resolve itself. Used to. That word always appears when knowledge leaves the room. Someone suggested rolling back a change. Someone else said they couldn't find the rollback script. It was never documented. Because documentation slows things down. That's what Avery had said once. By 3 p.m., leadership joined the call. Voices tightened. Sentences shortened. No one mentioned my name. Not yet. They were still in the phase where they believed effort would solve it. By evening, effort was exhausted. That's when someone finally asked the question out loud. Who built this? And for the first time all day, the silence felt different. Heavier. Because everyone knew the answer. And no one knew how to say it. That's when I realized something important. This wasn't falling apart because I was gone. It was falling apart because they believed I was optional. And the system was about to teach them the difference. Before I continue, let me say this quietly. If you enjoy stories about calm decisions, corporate consequences, and what happens when silence outplays ego, take a second to subscribe to this channel. Most people listen and move on. Subscribing is how these stories keep coming. Alright, back to what happened next. By the time the call came, it was already evening. Not late, just late enough for denial to wear thin. I was standing in my kitchen when my phone lit up. Unknown number. Corporate area code. I didn't rush to answer. I let it ring once. Twice. When I finally picked up, no one spoke at first. Then a voice I recognized immediately. My manager. The same calm voice that had thanked me for my time. Hey, he said, carefully. Hope you're, well. He paused, waiting for something. Reassurance. Forgiveness. Permission. I said nothing. We're running into some unexpected behavior, he continued. Thought you might have insight. Insight. Not help. Not responsibility. Insight. I looked at the window. Fireworks debris still scattered across the street below. Yesterday's celebration already forgotten. I was terminated, I said calmly. Another pause. Longer this time. Yes, he replied. Of course. We're just trying to understand the system. That was the moment I knew. They still thought this was technical. They believed knowledge could be extracted without consequence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't sound offended. I don't have access anymore, I said. And I'm no longer authorized to advise. Silence. Not awkward silence. Alarmed silence. I see, he said finally. We're escalating internally. I wished him luck. Genuinely. When the call ended, I sat down. Not relieved. Not angry. Certain. Because escalation only works when there's a ladder to climb. They were about to discover they'd cut it off. By midnight, the issue had spread. Not broken systems. Broken timelines. Clients noticed delays. Partners asked questions. Dashboards turned from green to yellow. Then stalled there. No alarms. Just uncertainty. And uncertainty is poison in executive rooms. By morning, legal was involved. Not because of failure. Because of exposure. A contract clause surfaced. One that required specific continuity assurances. Assurances that depended on undocumented processes. Processes I had quietly maintained. Someone suggested bringing me back temporarily. As a consultant. That suggestion didn't last long. Egos were now involved. Admitting they needed me would mean admitting the firing was a mistake. Instead, they chose something worse. They chose confidence. They reassigned ownership. Declared the issue under control. Sent updates filled with optimism and no details. That's when the real damage began. Because systems don't forgive optimism. They respond to accuracy. And accuracy had already left the building. By noon, the board was asking questions. By evening, the CEO was briefed. And somewhere between those two moments, my name was finally said out loud. Not with blame. With regret. But regret doesn't fix architecture. And New Year's Day was almost over. They were running out of quiet. By the second morning, the tone had changed. Not frantic. Defensive. Executives stopped asking what was happening and started asking how it looked. That shift matters. Because once perception becomes the priority, reality is already losing. Internal updates were rewritten. Words softened. Timelines blurred. Minor disruptions. Temporary latency. Contained impact. None of it was true, but it sounded controlled. The systems were still running, barely, held together by retries and assumptions that no longer applied. Someone higher up made a decision. I could tell. Not because I was informed, but because the behavior changed. They froze deployments, paused integrations, sent a company-wide message reminding everyone to remain aligned. Alignment. That word always appears when uncertainty reaches the top. Behind closed doors, blame started moving. Not upward. Sideways. Avery's name came up. Not as a cause. As a shield. The CEO's daughter-in-law wasn't questioned. She was insulated. No one challenged her restructuring logic. No one asked why institutional knowledge had been dismissed as inertia. Instead, they reframed the narrative. This is why we needed change. This proves the old model couldn't scale. They turned consequence into justification. I watched it happen without being there. Because I knew their language. I'd heard it before. Every time something failed, they called it proof that they were right. Not evidence that they were wrong. Around midday, another call came in. This time from legal. They were polite. Careful. Precise. They asked about my knowledge of certain systems. Whether I had documented procedures. Whether I'd trained replacements. I answered honestly. Documentation existed where it had been allowed. Training happened where time permitted. But some things were never formalized. Not because I withheld them. Because leadership discouraged friction. Legal went quiet. They understood the risk now. By afternoon, the board demanded a written summary. Not of the failure. Of the exposure. And exposure is where truth stops being optional. Someone suggested bringing in an external firm. A consulting group. Expensive. Impressive. They would audit. Assess. Recommend. It was a delay tactic. Consultants buy time. They don't buy understanding. Meanwhile, customers started noticing patterns. Not outages. Absences. Things that used to happen automatically now required manual intervention. Requests that once resolved silently now needed meetings. The machine was still moving. But it was louder. And loud systems attract attention. By evening, the CEO joined the call. His voice calm. Measured. He didn't ask about me. He asked about assurance. How confident are we that this won't escalate? No one answered directly. That's when he said something that changed everything. Then prepare for disclosure. Disclosure. Not resolution. Just readiness for when the truth arrived on its own. Because even then, they believed they could manage it. What they didn't realize was that the truth had already moved beyond management. It was now contractual. And contracts don't care who fired who. They care who understood what. By the end of that day, the company wasn't facing a technical issue. It was facing a credibility problem. And credibility, once cracked, never breaks quietly. By the third day, the problem stopped belonging to the company. That's when everything changes. Internal issues can be reframed, rewritten, deferred. External ones don't negotiate. The first email came from a partner. Short, neutral, carefully worded. They noticed a delay, asked for confirmation, requested assurance. Assurance is a dangerous word, because once you give it, you own what happens next. Leadership responded with confidence. They always do. Temporary disruption. Under review. No impact expected. None of it was grounded in understanding. By midday, a second partner followed. Then a third. Different industries. Same pattern. Each one depended on a system that still technically existed, but no longer behaved predictably. What used to resolve itself in seconds now required coordination. Manual steps. Meetings. The company had optimized for speed, not resilience. And resilience is invisible until it's gone. Inside, people started improvising. Not fixing. Improvising. Workarounds piled on top of workarounds. Short-term decisions stacked like cards. Every fix introduced a new dependency. Every dependency narrowed the margin for error. Someone suggested documenting everything. Too late. Documentation describes what already exists. It doesn't recreate understanding. By afternoon, a regulator appeared in an inbox. Not aggressively. Curiously. They were asking about compliance continuity, about operational assurance during staffing transitions. Legal flagged it immediately. That question carried weight, because the answer couldn't be spun. The truth was simple. They didn't know. They didn't know how certain safeguards worked. They didn't know who could certify them. And they couldn't say they were confident. That's when the phrase material risk entered the conversation. Once that happens, everything slows down. Decisions require sign-off. Sign-offs require confidence. Confidence requires facts. Facts were missing. Late that evening, I received an email. Not a call this time. An email. From compliance. They weren't asking for help. They were asking for confirmation. Whether I had ever signed off on specific controls. Whether I had been responsible for certain approvals. Whether my removal had altered operational integrity. I answered carefully. Honestly. I confirmed what I had done. And what I had no longer been authorized to do. Nothing more. Nothing less. The next morning, the company paused onboarding. Then paused deployments. Then paused announcements. The growth narrative stalled. Internally, frustration turned into fear. Not panic. Fear is quieter. People stopped speaking freely in meetings. Started following up in writing. Someone leaked a rumor about an internal investigation. Another about leadership review. Avery stopped hosting meetings. Her name still appeared on documents. But her voice faded. The CEO scheduled a board session. Emergency. Private. And for the first time since New Year's Eve, the question wasn't about systems. It was about judgment. Who made the call? Who approved it? And who failed to understand what they were removing? That's when the company crossed a line it couldn't step back over. Because once accountability enters the room, someone always starts counting decisions. And decisions leave fingerprints. Before I continue, let me say this. If you love beautiful stories, the kind that unfold slowly, the kind that reward patience, the kind that make you notice what most people miss, subscribe to this channel. By subscribing, you help stories like this find the right people. People who listen closely. People like you. Alright, back to what happened next. The pause didn't come with an announcement. It never does. There was no company-wide email that said we are stopping. No calendar block labeled everything is wrong. They just stopped deploying. First quietly. Then deliberately. Code freezes appeared on dashboards without explanation. Release timelines slid without being replaced. The phrase pause deployment began appearing in messages like a suggestion, not an order. But everyone understood what it meant. When deployment pauses, fear has entered the building. The system was no longer trusted. Not enough to move forward. Not enough to roll back. They were stuck. That's the most dangerous place for a company to be. Between motion and paralysis. Engineers started checking the same logs over and over, hoping something would change if they stared long enough. Product teams stopped promising dates. Sales quietly delayed conversations. And leadership started asking questions that had no clean answers. How long can we stay paused? What's the risk if we resume? Who can certify this? That last question lingered. Because certification isn't about authority. It's about knowledge. And knowledge had already walked out of the building on New Year's Eve. Someone suggested rebuilding parts of the system from scratch. Another suggested accelerating the consulting engagement. A third suggested documenting everything immediately. None of those options solved the real problem. They didn't know what they didn't know. By midday, tension showed up in small ways. Shorter emails. Meetings with too many people and no decisions. Managers checking with legal before speaking. Avery stayed quiet. Not absent. Just quieter than before. Her optimism no longer filled rooms. It hovered at the edges, unsupported. And that's when the CEO asked for a full operational timeline. Not a summary. Not highlights. A timeline. Who approved what? Who signed which decision? Who removed which role? That request changed the air. Because timelines don't care about intent. They only care about sequence. And sequence tells stories people can't interrupt. Late that afternoon, a document started circulating internally. Unlabeled. Unshared. It mapped dependencies. Approvals. Exceptions. And my name appeared more than once. Not prominently. but consistently. Not as a hero. As a reference point. The person who had been there before systems were polished. Before shortcuts were normalized. Before resilience was replaced by speed. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt something quieter. I felt inevitability. Because once deployment pauses, momentum reverses. And when momentum reverses, someone always asks the question no one wanted asked in the first place. Should she have been fired? That question didn't get answered that day. But it didn't need to. It had already begun doing its work. The silence didn't break where anyone expected it to. It didn't happen in engineering. Not in leadership. Not even in legal. It broke in a room that didn't care about narratives. The audit committee. They weren't emotional. They weren't impressed by confidence. They didn't care who married who, or how many buzzwords made it into a slide deck. They cared about sequence. What existed before? What was changed? What was removed? And most importantly, why? By the time the committee was briefed, the story had already shifted. This wasn't about a system glitch anymore. It was about decision-making. They asked for documentation. Not summaries. Original records. Approval trails. Change logs. That's where things slowed down again. Because documentation tells you what happened. Logs tell you when. But understanding tells you why. And understanding was thin. The timeline showed something uncomfortable. Systems that had worked for years without incident. Safeguards that had never been flagged as problems. Approvals that had always required a specific role. And then, that role was removed. Not phased out. Not transitioned. Removed. On New Year's Eve. No contingency plan. No overlap. No formal handoff. The committee didn't react. That's the part people underestimate. They didn't argue. They didn't assign blame. They asked one question. Was this risk evaluated? The answer came back vague. We believed the structure could absorb the change. Believed. Belief is not a control. The next question followed immediately. Who made that determination? That's when the room went quiet. Not awkward quiet. Accounting quiet. The kind where everyone understands the weight of what's being asked. Names were offered carefully. Responsibilities described broadly. No one said Avery's name directly. But no one needed to. The structure spoke for itself. The committee requested follow-up. More detail. More clarity. Money reacts faster than pride. It doesn't care about optimism. It doesn't wait for explanations. It simply adjusts. The first sign wasn't an alarm. It was a revision. A forecast quietly updated. A projection trimmed. A growth curve flattened without commentary. Finance teams started running parallel models. One assumed recovery. One assumed delay. One assumed nothing at all. The third one was the one leadership kept asking to see. Budgets that had been approved weeks earlier were suddenly under review. Hiring plans stalled. Vendor renewals slowed. No one said the word loss. They didn't have to. The paused deployments had consequences. Not dramatic ones. Cumulative ones. Missed windows. Delayed commitments. Partnerships that cooled without explanation. Clients didn't complain loudly. They adjusted quietly. They started asking for alternatives. For contingencies. For reassurance that came with documentation. Documentation the company couldn't fully provide. That's when the board asked for numbers. Not estimates. Actual impact. What does a pause cost per day? What does uncertainty do to valuation? What happens if this stretches into weeks? Those questions change behavior. Meetings shortened. Voices lowered. Decisions deferred upward. Someone suggested reducing exposure by scaling back operations temporarily. Another suggested delaying public announcements. No one suggested restarting deployment. Because restarting would require confidence. And confidence was gone. By midweek, the phrase material impact appeared in writing. That phrase doesn't exist for drama. It exists for accountability. Legal reviewed contracts again. Finance flagged risk. Operations froze anything that could introduce unpredictability. The company wasn't collapsing. It was shrinking. Quietly. Carefully. Irreversibly. I watched from a distance. Not with satisfaction. With clarity. This wasn't revenge. It was gravity. The system was responding exactly the way systems do when assumptions fail. Late one evening, I received another message. Not a request. Not a question. An update. Board review ongoing. External counsel retained. All major initiatives paused until further notice. That's when it became clear. This wasn't about fixing what broke. It was about containing what had been exposed. And containment always costs more than prevention. Somewhere inside that company, someone was doing the math. Counting days. Counting dollars. Counting decisions. And every count led back to the same moment. New Year's Eve. The decision that looked clean on paper. And complicated in reality. I closed the message and sat back. By this point, something strange had happened. No one was trying to fix the problem anymore. They were trying to survive it. That's when I knew the story had changed. Because companies only stop fixing things when they realize the damage can't be undone. Emails became shorter. Not calmer. Shorter. Meetings lost their energy. Not because answers were found. Because everyone was afraid of being the one who spoke last. You could feel it. The hesitation. The careful pauses before every sentence. That's when external counsel truly took over. Not officially. Functionally. Leadership still appeared in meetings. Still nodded. Still spoke in that confident tone executives practice. But the decisions weren't theirs anymore. Every step now required review. Every message required approval. Every move left a trail. And trails change behavior. People stopped guessing. Stopped improvising. Started protecting themselves. Questions changed. Not, how do we fix this? But, who approved this? When was that decision made? Was this documented before or after the change? Those questions weren't about progress. They were about distance. Distance from blame. Avery's name began appearing again. Not loudly. Carefully. Referenced in timelines. Mentioned in restructuring notes. Never accused. Never defended. Just present. That's how accountability enters a room. Not as an accusation. As a fact. The board requested interviews. Not discussions. Interviews. People reviewed calendars. Old emails. Slack messages they never expected to matter. They tried to remember meetings they had rushed through at the time. Memory failed them. Records didn't. That's when the company crossed a line it couldn't cross back over. This was no longer about technology. Or timing. Or even leadership. It was about judgment. About who decided what. And who didn't understand the weight of that decision. I understood then why the firing had been so calm. They thought they were ending a conversation. What they actually started was a record. And records don't care about confidence. They care about sequence. The company wasn't collapsing. It was being rewritten. Quietly. Line by line. Without permission. The call didn't come quickly. That's important. If it had come sooner, it would have sounded like panic. If it had come later, it would have sounded like damage control. Instead, it arrived at the exact moment the company finally understood what had happened. A month after New Year's Eve. It wasn't my manager this time. It was the CEO. His voice was steady. Not warm. Not defensive. Careful. He didn't start with an apology. He asked questions. Slow ones. Specific ones. He wanted to understand the system the way it had actually worked. Not the version in slides. Not the version in summaries. The real one. I answered calmly. I didn't dramatize. I didn't assign blame. I didn't explain intent. I explained sequence. There was a pause on the line. Longer than before. Then he said it. We made a mistake letting you go. No speech followed. No justification. Just the sound of someone realizing a decision had already traveled farther than they expected. They offered me a role. Not my old one. A higher one. With authority this time. With clarity. With protections that should have existed years ago. A promotion shaped by consequence, not generosity. I didn't accept immediately. I asked for it in writing. Because when you understand systems, you learn that words disappear. Records don't. But before anything could move forward, something else had already happened. A week earlier, another call had come. From a larger company. One that had watched quietly. Read the situation clearly. and understood exactly what kind of person I was. They didn't ask me to fix chaos. They asked me to build stability. They acknowledged my work without questioning it, respected my experience without minimizing it, and they offered me a role that didn't come from regret. It came from recognition, the kind that doesn't need convincing. When I informed the CEO, there was another pause. This one was different. Not reflective. Final. He understood. Some opportunities don't come back once they've moved on. Neither do people. I chose the place that saw my value before losing it. And that was the real ending. Not revenge. Not triumph. Alignment. The company didn't collapse. It adjusted. I didn't return. I advanced. And if there's a lesson in all of this, it isn't about corporate power or titles. It's this. Your quiet work still matters. Your patience still counts. And the right people don't need to lose you to know what you're worth. If you enjoy stories like this, stories about timing, consequence, and quiet wins, subscribe to this channel. By subscribing, you help stories like this reach people who understand them. People who listen closely. People who know that not every victory needs noise to be real. Thanks for staying until the end.